The future turned out to be not as bright as we imagined. An unknown type of plague started to cripple the world's population. With very few people left, a handful of scientists from Atlanta set out to develop a cure for the disease. However, they do not have enough information, and the necessary data is available in New York. That's where Pearl Prophet is sent, along with a slinger named Marshall Stratt. Having obtained the information that will allow them to create a cure, Pearl falls into the eyes of bandits led by Fender Tremolo. They chased after Pearl and her guide. The Marshal was wounded, and he sent Pearl ahead, promising to hold off the bandits. He also advised her to find a new slinger. He would get her to Atlanta. When Pearl left, Fender and his men showed up. They beat up Marshall, and the latter told him what information Prophet had on her. He tried to explain that it would cure people of the plague, but Fender didn't care. He liked the status quo. However, he realizes that if he is the one and only owner of the cure, he will have unlimited power in this world. Fender decides to capture Pearl, and kills Marshall. Fender sends his cutthroats on the girl's trail, and when Pearl finds herself at a dead end, the thugs are killed by another slinger. His name is Gibson Rickenbacker. Pearl asks Gibson to take her to Atlanta. She reveals that she is a cyborg, and has some particularly valuable information on her. At that moment, Fender's gang shows up. As they open fire, Gibson tries to find cover, breaks through a door, and the ceiling collapses on him. Fender demands that Pearl take him to Atlanta and give him the finished cure for the plague. If she refuses to help, she will be killed. To prove he's not joking, Fender shows her Marshall's severed head. Pearl has no choice but to agree to the outlaw's terms. As he takes the cyborg away, Gibson comes to his senses. He remembers what information Pearl is carrying, and decides to rush in pursuit and snatch her from the bandits' clutches. Meanwhile, Fender shows up at the fishing village. He needs a boat, and for it, he kills all the villagers. His gang then travels by sea to Atlanta. Gibson comes to this village at night. One of the survivors sees and tries to kill him, but Gibson spots her in time and knocks her out with a precise throw to the head. And while the girl is unconscious, Gibson sharpens his cleaver. In the process, he recalls his first encounter with Fender. A few years ago, he had become a guide for a woman with children who lost their breadwinner. Her name was Mary. She asked him to take them to safety, and Gibson agreed. Along the way, they fell in love, and the new acquaintance suggested that he forget his wanderings and stay with them. Gibson agreed. They led a peaceful life for a while, but then Fender and his bandits showed up. He bound Gibson, the boy, and Mary with barbed wire, and put them down a well. He made Haley hold the other end of the wire, but the girl failed, and her family died. Only Gibson survived, and since then, he hated Fender fiercely and wanted to kill him. In the morning, the girl comes to her senses. Her name is Nadie Simmons, and she intends to help Pearl get to Atlanta because she has the secret of a cure for the plague. Nadie goes with Gibson, but it's more important for him to finish Fender. Pearl's life is not his main concern. As darkness falls, Gibson and Nadie come to a small settlement where Gibson has learned the route of Fender and his pirates. He hopes to catch him along the way during another stopover. However, Gibson's buddy advises him to stay away from this bandit, as Fender is very powerful. To get ahead of the pirates, Gibson and Nadie must go through the abandoned lands. This place is extremely dangerous, and the slinger soon becomes convinced of it. He spots a gang wearing mesh masks and outflanks them from the rear. Nadie heads straight ahead and falls into the bandits' hands. At that moment, Gibson appears and starts taking out the villains one by one. He not only uses power angle kicks, but also firearms, and even throws knives. Having dealt with the criminals, Gibson takes Nadie to the beach where Fender is supposed to pass by. Seeing the sea, Nadie wastes no time. She throws off all her clothes and goes for a swim. Gibson also takes a dip in the water, and in the evening, they sit around the campfire in their pelt. Nadie hints at intimacy, but Gibson refuses. Memories of Mary come flooding back to him. In the morning, Gibson discovers Fender's boat in the coastal waters. At this point, Pearl was in the hold, reminiscing about how she came to be in this situation. She was an ordinary person when she agreed to the trip to New York. For the sake of this mission, her body had been enhanced by fusing living tissue with cybernetic implants. As they docked and took their team to the abandoned factory building, Fender spotted Gibson and Nadie. They were heading the same way with their weapons ready. Once inside the factory building, Gibson asked Nadie to stay put, but she disobeyed him. When she went to explore the building, Fender and his minions caught her. Gibson also encountered one of the thugs. They got into a knife fight, and Gibson almost overpowered his opponent. But then he was attacked by another pirate. He managed to escape from him, and once downstairs, Gibson saw Fender. In front of him laid Nadie. Gibson fought his way through and was wounded in the process. That's when he saw Haley. The same girl who had struggled to keep him, Mary, and her little brother on the barbed wire was now with Fender. Deciding that the family was dead, she had defected to the enemy's side. It sent Gibson into a frenzy. He threw a knife at Fender's head, but Fender ducked. Gibson escaped, and while the bandits were searching for him, he came to Pearl, who was guarded by two pirates, and killed them. Pearl, however, refused to leave with him. She believes that Gibson is in no position to finish off Fender, but there are men in Atlanta who can do it. She leads him to certain death, so she asks Gibson to leave. He picks up Nady and escapes. Fender's goons come after him. Gibson has to go down into the sewers. He leaves Nady on the sidelines and climbs up with his feet against the walls. In this position, he waits for one of the pirates and kills him. Nady regains consciousness and continues walking on her own feet. They get out of the sewers and run across the field to the coast. They are followed by Fender's cutthroats. Gibson manages to kill a few men, but they grow in number and beat up Gibson. Fender finishes the job. He lures Gibson to the old ship with blows and then chains him to the mast, turning it into a crucifix. When the outlaws leave, Haley stands looking at Gibson for a while longer. She feels sorry for him. Fender calls her, however, and she goes after her leader. As Gibson hung from the mast, he was plagued by memories. He tried his best to free himself, but failed. It was Nady who saved him. She healed his wounds, and the two of them went after Fender and his gang. Meanwhile, Pearl leads the pirates to Atlanta. Fender realizes that she plans to get away from them in the city. He warns her not to dice with death. As his wounds heal, Gibson comes to Atlanta and finds Fender. He shoots under his feet with a bow to acknowledge his presence. He then disposes of the bow, takes a knife in his teeth, and throws himself into the fistfight. Fender sends his goons against Gibson. The fight ensues, with Gibson killing his opponents one by one. Nady helps him with this. She kills Pearl's guard and takes the cyborg woman away. Fender's men are sent after them. When Pearl and Nady run into the building, Pearl falls and passes out, and Nady starts fighting off one of the pirates. She wrestles him to the ground with a stool, but a woman appears and knocks this formidable weapon out of her hands. At this point, a thunderstorm begins, and Gibson confronts Fender. The leader does not hurry to fight. First, he sends one of his own to certain death. Gibson uses a well-placed right leg kick against him. He kills his opponent with a spinning kick, sending him into the fire. He catches fire and dies in agony. Fender has to take off his ring gear and fight Gibson. At this point, Haley stands behind him and watches the fight. She is more worried about Gibson than her master. After taking a dramatic pause, Gibson rushes in to attack, but Fender easily deflects his punch and starts beating him down. Gibson uses his best power angle kicks, but one cannot defeat Fender with them. He throws his opponent inside the car and then starts cracking his head open with the door in Vinnie Jones style from Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. Haley sees this and can't stand it. She begs Fender to stop. Realizing that Haley has betrayed him, he heads out to kill her. That's when Nady shows up. She's done with her opponent, except she's been beaten pretty well before that. Nady distracts Fender, which allows Gibson to kick him in the back. Fender can't be stopped that easily, however. He wounds Nady and heads towards Haley. Seeing this, Gibson jumps out of the car and stands in front of his opponent. He won't let any harm come to Haley. As the fight ensues, Gibson gets beaten by Fender again, but then seizes the initiative and stabs him in the chest. Deciding that the villain is dead, Gibson goes over to Haley to hug her. At that moment, Fender rises to his feet and attacks Gibson. They break through the door and end up in the building. Here they start choking each other and then move into a fight in the melee. Gibson doesn't have a knife hole in his chest, so he gets the upper hand. He beats up his opponent and puts him on a hook hanging on the wall. Fender is left dangling on it as Gibson walks away. Pearl regains consciousness, makes her way outside, and sees Gibson mourning the dead Nady. He then takes the cyborg woman to the scientists. They offer Gibson to stay, as they could use such a man, but Gibson refuses. He says that people need him. He leaves with Haley. Watching him go, Pearl says that it's people like Gibson that the world needs. They're the only ones who can protect the rest of the people no worse than the cure for the plague.